you guys, and welcome back to my channel. I haven't sat down to film in over 2 weeks. Everything this past Saturday and the Saturday before was way pre-filmed. I've been on vacation, but I am back now and it feels so good to be sitting down again and filming for you guys, doing what I love to do. So I'm so excited to dive right on into this video and the case we're going over. But first, I have something pretty exciting to show you guys. So before I went on vacation, a friend of mine named Brandy that I've known for a few years now through YouTube reached out to me and said that she had something fun that she wanted to send me, and this is what I ended up getting in the mail. She sent me, I don't know if you can see this, literally what my soul is made out of, black sparkles. And then this one is white and sparkly. She sent me these two amazing tumblers to rep my channel. While I was on vacation, I went to the beach, so these were literally absolutely perfect to bring with me. And you guys know I'm actually a workaholic. Like, it takes a lot for me to not work at literally all times of the day, morning, night, on vacation, wherever. So it made me super, super excited to be able to actually carry something with me to the beach to still rep the missing. It was absolutely amazing that she thought of me. I didn't know she was making these. She totally surprised me with them and I was just blown away. So after she sent me these in the mail, me and her started talking because I've always wanted to try to offer you guys a different type of merchandise than just t-shirts, because I know a lot of people aren't necessarily interested in just wearing t-shirts, and it's not something you can use daily to support my channel or to continuously raise awareness for missing persons. So she has decided to help me out this month, and for the rest of the month of July, she will be giving you guys 20% off either one of these designs. So it has to be my logo. She will still put your name on the back of them, and you can pick from a few different colors, but I thought it's absolutely amazing. And because I am a hardworking mother from home, I am always willing to support other hardworking mothers from their home, and this is her little business that she just created, and these tumblers are so nice. If you guys want to support my channel and support my friend Brandy, I will have all the links down below to where you can purchase these. You have to use the promotion code HallanFam if you go to her Etsy shop, and then just mention me when you go to her Facebook page. And so far she's made quite a few of them, so I want to say thank you to you guys for so much support. Literally always. You guys are forever having my back and forever supporting the missing with me, and I appreciate it more than you know. So now that that is out of the way, I am diving right into the missing persons, and there are multiple in this one particular video. I don't think I've covered any case that has enraged me to the extent that this has enraged me, and I feel like you guys are going to 100% understand why I feel this way once I get deeper into this. This is a very, very complicated situation. It's a very heartbreaking one. It's one that unfortunately to me is very blatantly obvious what's going on here, but it's just how it's being treated that makes it that much worse. So today's case is on the disappearance of Edward Dillon and Austin Bryant. So Edward Dillon, the name he was given by his birth mother was Dillon. Edward comes in later on in the picture, but because he is under every missing persons page and he is considered a missing person under the name of Edward, that's what I'm going to be using for him today. According to what I've heard, that is not what he preferred. He wanted his birth name Dillon, and then, as I said, his younger brother Austin. So I guess just to go ahead and get on into this, it wasn't just the two of them. There was Edward, Austin, and they had a very, very young brother that I have personally seen referred to as David, but later on I've also seen referred to as James. So like I said, this is going to be very, very complicated. I will be referring to them as like the names they were last known to have. So these boys had a very difficult upbringing. Their mother had very traumatizing events that I am not going to be getting into at all happened to her when she was fairly young, and because of this she suffered from a lot of different mental illnesses. So she was formally diagnosed with severe depression, bipolar disorder, as well as PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, from these events that happened to her earlier on in her life. And when she was finally diagnosed with all of this, at that point she had 3 children, and she was put on some very, very heavy medications that essentially made her sleep all day in order to cope with how she was feeling. Obviously, as a mother, when you are suffering just alone with those 3 different, very difficult mental illnesses, and on top of that, you have these very heavy medications that you're taking, it can become incredibly difficult to take care of your children. And that was already one issue, but to make things a little bit worse, there were a lot of allegations going on from the school that there was abuse and neglect happening in the home. Now, from what I've read, the kids lived in a pretty good home with their mother, but they lived near a dog kennel, and they loved it because they could go and play with the dogs and pet the dogs, and it was entertaining. One day, Edward came to school, and the school noticed that he had what appeared to be a very bad dog bite on the back of his leg, and they came forward and claimed that this was neglect. The mother wasn't taking care of the dog bite. The mother wasn't watching them around these dogs. She personally claimed it was just an infected mosquito bite. But because of this, social services intervened and the boys were put into foster care. So this is when the boys went to Monument, Colorado to live with Edward and Linda Bryant as foster children in 1999. So this seemed like a great situation. Their mother got them every Wednesday night. She would go and take them to McDonald's to have a good dinner, and then she would have them over the weekends. And it seemed to be working out and satisfying everybody involved. She was able to deal with her mental illnesses better. She had someone that she knew was always there to properly take care of these children. And the adoptive parents seemed very, very happy as well. Both Edward and Linda seemed to be very, very good parents. So after a few months of the boys being in the Bryant home, everything was working beautifully, and Linda and Edward approached the boys' biological mother and asked her if they could adopt the boys fully. And this was kind of one of those points where she realized she had a decision to make, and she loved her children more than absolutely anything, but she just wasn't in the best situation to take care of them. And she honestly believed that if they went into the Bryant home, that they would have a mother and a father in the picture, that they would be able to better take care of the children, all the things that I listed before, so she allowed them to formally adopt her boys. At this point, there really weren't any red flags when it came to Linda and Edward Bryant. As I said, they seemed like outstanding parents, and the boys had no complaints when they were just foster children. But as soon as the adoption process started, a few things started to happen. So Dylan was then renamed to Edward Dylan Bryant, and the family referred to him as Edward, which he very verbally announced to everyone that he did not like that name, he didn't want that name. He started cursing at his adoptive parents, saying, "My name is Dylan, call me Dylan." And their mother did notice this and was kind of alarmed. She had never heard her son curse before. She was upset that her son was being renamed to his adoptive father's name. It was just kind of one of those really touchy situations. It's normal for there to be some level of conflict when adoption is happening, between the children being upset and the new parents wanting something, to change. And that's what everyone pretty much chalked it up to, was that this was just the way things were playing out. The children then started asking their biological mom frequently when they were going to be coming home, but by the time they started asking this, the Bryant home was their home, and their biological mother technically was no longer legally their mother anymore. The boy's biological mother would frequently call the home, and Edward Dylan would always be sitting there waiting to talk to her. They would talk for hours, but the closer it got to the actual adoption finalization, things became getting a little bit rocky, and instead of him answering, the Bryants would answer, and they always had some excuse as to why Edward couldn't come to the phone. And then finally it got to the point where the Bryants asked the boy's biological mother to just stop calling altogether, and the last time that she spoke to her boys was in Christmas of 1999, right before everything was finalized in 2000. By early 2000, both Austin and Edward were officially adopted by the Bryants. And I know that their younger brother was also adopted, but he is still alive and well, and his whereabouts are known, so I was not able to gather a lot of information when it came to his particular involvement and position and place in all of this. But Austin was 4 years old at the time of the finalization, and Edward was 7 years old. So they were both fairly young, and I'm pretty sure their younger brother was about 15 months old at the time. Now, one of the things that made this adoption a little bit different is that both Edward and Austin were considered special needs. So when they were adopted out, because I know for a fact Edward was diagnosed with ADHD, I'm not sure what Austin was diagnosed with, but because both boys did have some sort of disability, the Bryants were awarded a subsidy for this. Usually after a family officially adopts a child into their home, there is no money that's given to them. Usually they're not checked up on, but in situations, for instance, in Colorado, where you adopt a large quantity of siblings, so you're keeping kids together, or you adopt someone with special needs, they will continue providing you assistance essentially to help you out, because it is a little bit trickier of a situation than just adopting one healthy child. So because of this, they were given $1,800 a month for both of the boys. And the only thing that was required of them to continue getting the subsidy was making a monthly roster to show that both boys had been in the home that month and to provide proof of education. And other than that, there was no check. No one came to make sure the boys were actually physically in the home. I think also they had to come in for an interview every 3 years, but they didn't have to bring the children with them. So basically, physically seeing these children was not a requirement. The Bryants used that to their advantage. The couple continued to live in Monument, Colorado from 1999, when they first started fostering the boys, until 2005, and there had only been one incident reported with any of those adopted children in that time frame, and that was on April 6, 2002. An incident was reported where Austin was said to have run away. And keep in mind, when Austin was adopted in 1999, he was only 4, so he was still fairly young when this incident did happen. And authorities jumped on this right away. They brought out helicopters, searched the entire area, and Austin actually ended up coming out of some bushes right beside the garage. And when he talked to the police, they didn't state why he ran away. He didn't have any sort of reasoning. He just said the only reason he didn't come out was because he was scared because of the commotion. So that right there was one small red flag. For some reason, Austin felt the need to run away from this family, even at such a young age. In 2005, Linda and Edward moved to Texas with all of the children, and shortly after this move, they ended up separated. So they had 2 separate houses and 2 separate towns in Texas, and they ended up selling both of the houses that they owned in Monument, Colorado. They also ended up filing for bankruptcy in 2007 and listed over $126,000 in adoption benefits as part of their income. And when they wrote all this down, they had the total number of children as dependents as 8. So after they adopted these 3 boys, they adopted 5 more. And in total, they were receiving about $5,500 a month in subsidies for all of these children combined. Linda did, however, have one biological daughter who also took in foster children, and this is when things started to kind of get odd. In January of 2011, authorities were notified by 2 of the foster children that had been living with Linda's daughter that Austin Bryant hadn't been seen since sometime between 2003 and 2005. That is 6+ years. One of these boys vanished and not a single person reported him missing. 2 men that came forward to authorities had been in Linda's daughter's foster care, living with her in 2003, and they were very suspicious of whatever happened to Austin. They remember that Austin always had black eyes, he had welts on them, he would tell them horrific stories. Well, he told one of them in particular horrific stories about being locked in a trunk and being tased and going days without about food and that Linda Bryant would make him run up and down the stairs again and again and again, and he was just horrifically abused. But Austin would also tell them stories about his brother Edward, and the two boys that had gone into foster care in 2003 under Linda's daughter weren't even aware of who Edward was. So that means sometime before 2003, Edward was missing as well. So this first phone call that started off as suspicion over one missing child turned into both of these brothers are gone sometime between 2003 and prior. After hearing these accounts, authorities decided to find Austin and Edward's younger brother, James, and they wanted to figure out what was going on, because who is a better person to ask than the younger brother that was also supposed to be in the home with them. They found him in Fort Campbell, and he was in the Army, and he had some very interesting information to tell them. So far they already knew that Austin vanished sometime between 2003 and 2005, and that the boys just hadn't ever seen Edward. But then James told them that he wasn't officially in the Bryant home until 2001, and when he moved in there, he didn't see his brother Edward either. So Edward had only been in the home for a year before he also had vanished. James was able to agree with what the other two men came forward and told authorities, that Austin was horrifically abused in the Bryant home. He said he remembers his brother being locked in a footlocker, and they would move it from bedroom to closet to garage, and sometimes he was locked in the trunk of the car, and he could hear his brother banging on it trying to escape for hours at a time. It was a horrific situation, and James said that he had never asked any questions, but he was almost positive based on this that the Bryants had done something to his brother Austin, and there is absolutely no telling what happened to Edward. Authorities went to question both Linda and Edward Bryant, and this is where things became blatantly obvious that there was something very, very wrong in this home, and these two definitely had something to do with it. First, Linda claimed that the children had been living with her the entire time, and that they had grown up at this point and she wasn't in contact with them. And then she said that they went to visit their biological mother in Oklahoma and had just never come back. They questioned all of the children, and they questioned Linda's biological daughter, and all of them had been told that both Edward and Austin had been institutionalized, and that's why they weren't in the home. But this wasn't even one of the reasons that she gave authorities. Linda claimed that both of the boys ran away at the same time in May of 2003, and Edward said that Edward Jr., for, purposes of understanding, ran away in 2001, and that Austin ran away in 2005. So, two completely different stories, and neither one of them matched up in any way, shape, or form. But the only thing that did match is that both Linda and Edward claimed that the boys ran away to be with their biological family. So, not soon after they released this information to the police showed up at their biological grandmother's house and completely surrounded it, scaring the absolute crap out of this woman. She didn't know what was going on, and after searching, they realized neither of the boys were there, and they hadn't ever been there. After looking through any documents they could possibly find on both Edward and Austin, and let me just tell you, there's slim to none, Edward went missing sometime in 2001 at the age of only 8 years old. Austin went missing after being pulled out of public school to be homeschooled in 2003. Either way, from 2003 on, there were no more records of either of the boys. The one thing that they could prove, though, is that even after the boys went missing and all records stopped, both Edward and Linda Bryant continued receiving $1,700+ a month in subsidies for both of the boys. And somehow they passed every single 3-year interview, and they were able to give these two documents in and continue receiving this money, no questions asked. In December of 2003, someone billed Medicaid on behalf of Edward, but this is at a time which they don't believe Edward was even in the home anymore, so they're not sure where this bill came from, if it was another way for them to get money. The whole story made absolutely no sense. How do you lose 2 of your children, continue on to adopt 5 more, move to a different state, and somehow manage to keep hidden that those children are gone? How did these children slip through everybody's fingers when it could have been caught countless amounts of times? This sent everyone into an absolute tailspin. Everyone was so incredibly upset and confused and disappointed. Their mother, their biological mother, was so distraught, had no idea what was going on, and everyone was wondering, how can there be this many flaws in the system to where for years these children were never checked on? How did this family adopt 5 more children after the fact? Because all of these other 5 adopted children were minors when Edward and Linda were arrested finally in February of 2011. That means they had to have been adopted after these boys went missing. How did no one check? There are checks that have to be done in the home. There are inspections and interviews. What on earth? How did this get by?
Well, now to a story that's really struck a nerve in our community. 2 young Monument brothers missing for nearly a decade. Their adoptive parents in jail on a $1 million bond while authorities pursue a possible homicide investigation. Now, last night, News First 5's Carolyn Carver revealed some shocking physical abuse allegation in court documents. Today, she's digging deeper, asking the El Paso County Department of Human Services how this could happen and why our tax dollars might have contributed to this elaborate suspected fraud scheme.
Growing up in the system, 7-year-old Austin Bryant was a foster child in El Paso County, then approved to be adopted by Edward and Linda Bryant. But as documented in this arrest affidavit, witnesses claim Austin endured serious physical abuse at the hands of Linda Bryant. The witnesses never knew the older Edward Bryant, reportedly missing for years before Austin even disappeared.
Once the children had both fully been adopted, the state was legally no longer allowed to perform any sorts of checks on the children. When a child is adopted into a family, it is that family's child, biological or not, which I think is an absolutely beautiful and amazing thing. But this proved that there were so many and still are so many flaws in the system. Linda had even made a massive effort to make it look like the boys were still in the home, which was later found out. She had gone onto Google and printed off pictures of random children on the internet and put them in frames all around the house. I mean, coded her house in Google Images and claimed, oh, this right here is Austin when he was this age. This is Edward when he was this age. They were going to extreme lengths to conceal the fact that these children were gone. James even told authorities when he was being interviewed that there was one point where an appointment had been scheduled by social services to come and inspect the home. Now, I don't know for what exact reasoning, but Linda actually asked James to get one of his friends to pose as one of the boys for this particular appointment. For one reason or another, the appointment was canceled and it was never rescheduled. So again, everything just fell through the cracks. As I said before, by February of 2011, both Linda and Edward were arrested and charged with multiple counts of theft, conspiracy, forgery, and attempting to influence a public official. They were extradited from Texas back to Colorado, and they were each held at $1 million bail. After totaling everything up, they had collected roughly $175,000 in benefits for both Edward and Austin after both children were no longer living in the home, and they had never reported either of these children missing, even as not just minors, but children under 10 years old. Edward Bryant told authorities that he had absolutely no idea that they had continued receiving payments, as if that was some way to get himself off when it comes to these children's disappearance. But to me, who cares if he knew they were receiving payments or not? He still let 2 of his own children that he adopted into his heart, into his family, go missing without reporting them missing. And this is just the start of where you're about to see me get so incredibly upset and so incredibly angry, because the focus in all of this is the money. It's the money that they stole. Linda did end up confessing that she purposely covered up both boys' disappearances so that she could continue to receive payments for both of these children. She admitted to this. It even went as far as to she made up a fake school. She completely fabricated this school that Edward went to as her proof of education to continue getting the subsidies. And not a single person checked that document. What is the point of sending in these documents and this proof to continue on getting your subsidies if those gathering this information, receiving this information, don't even check it. She had fabricated this school for years. A completely fake made-up school with a completely fake made-up name for a boy who she hadn't seen in years. And nobody noticed. Despite the fact that she had admitted to authorities that Edward ran away in 2003, they had proof that just a year before, in I think it was October of 2010, she sent in paperwork saying that Edward was set to graduate in July of 2011. And the reason she did this, the specific reason this paperwork went in and had him graduating at that time, was so she could continue to receive payments for him after his 18th birthday, to prove that he was still in high school past his 18th birthday. She just kept tricking the system over and over and over and over again. Both Linda and Edward completely denied all of the abuse allegations. They denied murdering either of the boys, but there are a few things that Linda decided, again, that she would admit to. She admitted to apparently wrapping Austin up so tightly in a blanket that he couldn't move, but of course she had some sort of excuse for that. She said, oh, well, a therapist told me that that's the best thing to do with him. She said that she wasn't actually withholding food from Austin. It was just called delayed feeding. Again, what in the world does that even mean? And she said that she made the kids run up and down the stairs as a form of exercise. It seemed like she was willing to give these little tidbits of information, and she always had an explanation for it. But unfortunately, it's very obvious that it didn't matter what she admitted to. It didn't matter what she said. It didn't matter what happened to either of these boys, because that was never the focus, and it is still not the focus. Linda faced 148 felony charges, and Edward faced a total of 13 charges, and not a single charge was in relation to the boys' disappearance, but instead it was all related to the money that they got after the boys disappeared. They still had these 5 minors that had been living in their home that ended up turning into wards of the state of Texas. So not only were both Edward and Austin and their brother James' lives affected, and the 2 boys that realized these other boys were missing, and the mother that thought she was putting these boys in trusted hands, not only were they all affected, but then these other 5 children that they greedily took into their home also were being put back as wards of the state because they were minors and had to start their journey basically all over again. At one point, Linda was asked what should be done with her, and if these words don't speak truth, then I don't know what does. When she was asked this question, she herself mentioned manslaughter. She literally said she would take all of the charges, including a manslaughter charge, if Edward could be kept out of prison so he could take care of the other 5 children. No one mentioned manslaughter. She brought this up on her own. Why would anyone bring up a charge like manslaughter unless they had some sort of guilty conscience? But no, nothing would be done to Linda or Edward when it came to the boys' disappearance. Instead, in 2012, Linda pleaded guilty to 54 felonies and was sentenced 42 years in prison. And later, Edward pleaded guilty to 5 felonies and was sentenced 30 years in prison. But again, no charges were related to the boys directly, just the money that the state lost. There was some searching done for the boys. Investigators and canine units searched the home that they had originally lived in Monument, Colorado. The area was thoroughly searched. They even used geographic information systems to look for any disturbances in the soil. They were able to go back years and check if there's any sort of variances to see if maybe the boys had been buried somewhere. They did have a couple of different locations that they dug to look for the boys, but in the end, they found nothing. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created updated photos of both Edward and Austin in hopes that maybe if they really had run away, someone out there would recognize them. And the police made sure to force out the boys' stories everywhere in social media and any sort of media that they could, in hopes that maybe someone that knew the Bryants at one point in time would come forward and have a little bit of information. Tips came in and they checked them all, but again, it just led nowhere. Authorities went to speak to neighbors to ask them, hey, these two kids were here at one point. They vanished. Did you not notice that? And sure enough, not a single person had. One of the neighbors even admitted that the family seemed very, very shady and they acted incredibly odd, but still, these kids fell through the cracks and they were completely dismissed by absolutely everybody. I've spoken about it before on this channel where we are just not accountable for ourselves. We are not accountable for anyone around us. I think about my children and I think about where I live. Every person, neighbor, people that work here, they all know me and they all know my children. If one of my kids is gone somewhere, someone always asks. And the fact that no one did that for these boys is so incredibly gut-wrenching and heartbreaking and infuriating. The family home in Colorado backs right up to a mountain range perfectly. And if they did anything to either of those boys, if the Bryants did anything to either of those boys, it would have been incredibly easy to conceal them in those mountains in a way that they would never be found. And that scares the piss out of me. There are so many areas where these boys were failed. Both Linda and Edward had threats in the media that they would be facing possible homicide charges, but nothing. When they were originally arrested, they weren't arrested for being negligent to their children. They weren't arrested for failing to report a minor missing person that is your child. They weren't charged for anything. It was like money, 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 money. These boys are missing, we'll search for them, but we're not going to charge the last people who were supposed to have them and who haven't possibly reported them missing for 10 years now. Nothing. It's like these boys didn't matter. Austin was pretty much the only one with any existing files. At the moment that Edward and Austin were adopted into the Bryant family, Edward basically ceased to exist, other than falsified documents made by Linda herself. Social services, year after year after year after year after year, just continued to accept these two pieces of paper from the Bryant family without double checking anything. So you tell me, what are these requirements put in place for? What is it, just so you have something to fall back on when you realize you've done your job incorrectly, when you haven't checked on anybody? It's just to have this proof to say you're not the one responsible. If they weren't gonna check it, what is the point? When you total things up, there were 20 separate documents that were sent in. 20 times nobody checked something when it came to the requirements. There were 3 separate interviews that were held with both Linda and Edward Bryant, and those were 3 more times, so now we're at a total of 23 times that this just was breezed over. 5 times that children were adopted afterwards, which leads us to 28 times total, plus however many inspections had to be done on the home in order for them to adopt these children, interviews, proof of this and that to show they could support these children. There are so many times, 28 times plus so many more that I just don't know of, that both Edward and Austin fell through the cracks, and 28 times where random Google pictures and fake memories held them over to get more money. 28 times that someone didn't care enough to double check the information that was being sent into them. And you guys have to understand, that is so bare minimum. It is so bare minimum. I bet you the real totals over 100 times. You know, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking that this was able to happen and to go on so long, and these boys just, no one knew to care. One person in specific that I've seen speak on this situation, it's a government official. This person says that they receive a grant for laptops, and yearly they have to provide like 4 to 5 different documents about these laptops, and they have to physically prove that they still have them. Someone has to see every single laptop. They have to be accounted for. And the fact that the government cares more and, you know, actually physically feels the need to see these laptops, but they don't feel the need to double check on human beings, these children that they have placed into a home. What is going on? What is going on in this world? The system itself is so incredibly flawed, and I know there are a lot of people out there, and I personally know a few social workers, and it's a situation where there are so few social workers. They are overworked, they are underpaid, and they could go in with a heart of gold, but the amount of help, it's like they have to pick themselves off into thousands of pieces to give to all these different children and all of these different people that they work with, and there's just not enough attention that's able to be paid to any of this. And that's no fault necessarily of the social workers and of the people who work there, because I am sure, given the situation they've been put in, they're doing the best that they can. But that just goes to show how badly the core of everything so desperately needs to be changed. There could be so much that they want to do. There could be so many things these social workers want to reach out and change and do, but when they are bound by these laws, these flawed, horrible laws at that, what are they supposed to do? Paso Department, which is the county that they were living in Colorado, has strongly defended themselves and said that they believe there is nothing else they could have done for these boys, but I honestly 100% disagree with that.
At this moment, you stand 100% behind DHS and all the decisions made up until now.
I stand behind our policies and programs as they currently exist, but we're always willing to look at processes in any case that comes forward. We'll review our practices, and we're not afraid to change those to improve the system.
So until we find out what really happened to Austin and Edward Bryant, we can only question if the system they grew up in really works.
If it had been a few months that this went undetected, because there's obviously going to be a time lapse between when things are checked up on when it comes to documents and these interviews, I get that. But 10 years is just mind-blowing. At that point, there was so much that you could have done. So much that you could have done, and the fact that even after all of this is realized, like, it had to have been shocking to realize it had been that long that these boys hadn't been seen. To still go on and only charge Linda and Edward with things that revolved around the money that the state lost, at least take that time to make up for the injustice that you've served to both of these children, all the injustice done to them, but still you messed that up. I do not understand, and I know there are so many people out there that are saying, well, why didn't those other 2 boys come in sooner? Why didn't James say something? Why didn't the biological mother say something? You have to keep in mind, Linda and Edward were so manipulative. Edward said he didn't even know that they were still receiving money. Now, whether that's true or not, there's absolutely no telling, but when they have told everyone, oh, these boys, they're ADHD, they were too crazy, they've been institutionalized, you know, we decided to give our rights over. A lot of people aren't going to question that, especially young children. They had nobody, you guys. Imagine feeling that. Imagine being abused horrifically by the people who took you in that were supposed to love you. Imagine those same people, your lifeline, your life support when you have nothing anymore, and you just vanish. And there's no one else to have your back. There's not a single other person. Imagine how alone they must have felt with whatever happened to them. And I am hoping they did run away, honestly. I am hoping they did, and they're out there and they are happy and they're living their life away from the way they were being treated in that home. But I just feel it so deep inside of me that Linda and Edward did something to those boys, and I just don't know if justice will ever be served. I honestly don't. I am shocked that there was no negligence charge or anything. While both Linda and Edward will more than likely end up dying in prison, that doesn't change that both of those boys might have died and there won't be any sort of justice for them. Those mountain ranges right behind the home extend so far, and it has been so long. It's almost been 20 years, and just a few years from now that Edward would have gone missing. There is just such a slim chance that anything will be found of these boys, and I am just hoping that there is still one person out there who knows more than they have let on, and they will come forward. Adoption can be such a beautiful thing, not just for people who don't have the ability to have their own child, not just for them, you know, but for the children who didn't have the option to stay with their biological parents, and they want someone to be there for them, and they want someone to love them. But when people just skate by and adopt children that are disabled just for the money and then don't take care of them and toss them, if you guys knew the amount of horror stories I heard while researching through all of this, the amount of horror stories that I stumbled upon while looking into this case, I fell down this rabbit hole of just case after case where people adopt children to live out their sick fantasies that they can't live out on anybody else. And you know, the fact that these people got more than one child and they would take one of them and harm one of them or murder one of them, and you know, no one would know, and they would continue adopting more. It's just, I don't understand. And there is this big army of people out there who say, well, there's always going to be those bad families that do that. There's always going to be those bad people who adopt children for money and then toss them aside, or adopt them to act out their sick fantasies. But the fact to me that even just that one person can adopt a child and do these horrific things for years and years and years on years, and no one catches it even when they're being checked. I dare any of you guys after this to go and search up how common things like this actually are, and you will be shocked that not more has been done. And it's almost like one of these things where we're like, oh, well, that's bound to happen. That doesn't mean we need to change the core of all this. You know, that doesn't mean that it negates all the good things. Obviously, it doesn't negate all of the good parents, but the fact that we're just okay with the rules still failing even one child is mind-boggling to me. And I feel like I wasn't even aware of things like this until I covered this case, and now I am just so entrapped in it. And I knew that this was something that I had to share on my channel and start a conversation about, because I was so incredibly unaware, and I know so many of you probably are too and are in such shock. It's just all so horrific that these sort of things can happen so easily, and you just assume that there's absolutely no way. And there is no telling what happened to either of those boys. There is no telling if anyone is ever going to find them. Ever in this entire time of me covering cases, granted I've only been doing this for a year now, have I stumbled across a case that's so obviously neglect on the parent side of things, only to further down read that those same parents were only charged for the money the state lost and the fraud, and not the children that they lost. I never, ever, ever expected to come across any case like that. My jaw hit the floor. Just to see how little was actually cared, just to see how little anyone really cared about those boys, and just to see where the focus was. It's just almost unbelievable at that point. And I know you guys know exactly where I'm coming from, and I hope I never see a case like this again. I know I probably will, but I'm hoping that I don't, because I have felt nothing but this burning fire of rage inside of me since seeing where the priorities were at. And it's sick, and it's twisted, and it's stuff like this that screws with my mind forever afterwards. So at this point, someone out there does know something, whether it's Linda, whether it's Edward, whether it's their daughter, whether it's one of the children that just can't remember because of all the trauma they were probably put through. I have no idea, but I hope there is some sort of justice for these boys. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. It's cases like this where I see and really feel the impact of looking into this camera that's literally like a foot ahead of me, like I could reach out and touch you guys. I really realized the impact of looking into this camera, and I'm really looking like almost 200,000 people in the face when I tell these stories, and knowing that before I started this, before, not even I think 30-40 minutes ago when I sat down, maybe a handful of people knew about these boys, and knowing that I just sat down and informed 200,000 people about them feels so good, because it's what they deserve. It is what they deserve. And I cry in every video now because I'm so just like emotionally stripped from doing these videos, but it's stuff like this that makes it for me. It is stuff like this that makes me know I'm doing this all for the right reasons, because these boys had nobody and they were probably so alone. And if I can share that story with as many people as possible, just yelling at a camera about how angry I am, then I am happy with that. I am pleased with that, and I hope it does something to bring those boys justice. Before I continue on just crying and looking crazy in front of the camera, at this point you all probably think I have just totally lost my marbles. But I just want to say thank you for taking time to listen to their story. However many of you see this, now you all know. And even if you're just here emotionally for these boys now, it's more than what they've ever had. Ever. And I hope that makes you feel good too. And share their story, and don't let them be forgotten, because they were forgotten so many times and they didn't deserve that. But before I make myself cry again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing to this channel. Thank you for putting up with my craziness and my tears, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to become a part of the Hallan fam so we can bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video, which, by the way, is also a crazy one. Bye guys.